Picture this. You're standing on a familiar beach at sunset, watching the gentle rhythm of waves lapping against the shore. The tide rolls in slowly, predictably, just as it has for millions of years. Children build sandcastles in its path, joggers time their runs around its cycle, and seabirds dance with its ebb and flow. It's peaceful, it's normal, it's fragile. Now imagine that same scene, but the ocean doesn't whisper, it roars. Instead of gentle waves caressing the sand, walls of water surge forward like liquid mountains, rising 10 stories high, swallowing everything in their path. The sandcastles don't stand a chance. Neither do the joggers. Neither do the cities behind them. This isn't science fiction. This is a question that could reshape everything we know about our blue planet. What if tides were 10 times stronger than they are today? Tonight, we're diving deep into a world where the ocean's pulse becomes a planetary heartbeat so powerful it could rewrite the rules of life itself. We'll explore how a simple twist of cosmic forces could transform Earth into something barely recognizable, a world where the sea doesn't just touch the land, but dominates it completely. The gentle tides we take for granted aren't just moving water. They're Earth's ancient dance with the moon, a gravitational waltz that has shaped our planet's destiny for billions of years. But what happens when that dance becomes a violent tango? What happens when the ocean's breath becomes a hurricane scream? As we journey through this thought experiment, you'll discover how 10 times stronger tides wouldn't just flood coastlines. They would redefine the very concept of coastlines. They wouldn't just affect marine life, they would reshape the entire web of life on Earth. And they wouldn't just challenge human civilization, they would force us to completely reimagine what it means to live on this watery world. So settle in as we explore a reality where the tide doesn't just turn, it transforms everything in its wake. The question isn't just how we would survive in such a world, but whether Earth itself would remain the planet we call home. To understand the magnitude of our hypothetical world, we first need to appreciate the elegant simplicity of how tides work today. Right now, as you listen to these words, invisible forces are pulling and pushing every drop of water in every ocean across our planet. The moon, our faithful companion hanging 238,900 miles away in space, is the primary conductor of this oceanic orchestra. Its gravitational pull reaches across the vacuum of space and tugs on Earth's waters with remarkable precision. But here's where it gets fascinating. The moon doesn't just pull the water closest to it. It creates a bulge of water on the side of Earth facing it, and simultaneously, another bulge on the completely opposite side. Think of Earth as a water balloon being gently squeezed. The water bulges out on two sides, creating high tides, while the areas in between experience low tides as water flows toward those bulges. This cosmic dance happens twice daily as our planet rotates beneath these invisible hands. The sun plays its part too, though more subtly. When the sun and moon align during new and full moons, their gravitational forces combine, creating spring tides, the highest highs and lowest lows. When they pull at right angles during quarter moons, we get neap tides, gentler and more moderate. Currently, this system works in perfect harmony. The average tidal range, the difference between high and low tide, measures about 6 feet globally. In some places like the Bay of Fundy in Canada, it can reach 50 feet. In others, like the Mediterranean, it barely reaches a few inches. This variation depends on underwater topography, coastal shape, and the resonance of water moving through ocean basins. But imagine if we could reach into space and dial up the moon's gravitational pull, or somehow amplify Earth's response to it. Picture the delicate balance that creates those 6-foot tidal ranges suddenly becoming 60 feet. The gentle breathing of our oceans would transform into gasping, desperate heaves that could swallow entire cities in each breath. The physics become staggering. Water that currently rises and falls like a slow, predictable elevator would surge like a tsunami twice daily. Harbors designed for modest tidal swings would face walls of water that could overtop skyscrapers. Rivers that normally flow toward the sea would find themselves battling incoming tidal bores so powerful they could reverse their flow for hundreds of miles inland. This isn't just about bigger waves at the beach. When you multiply tidal forces by 10, you're not just moving more water, you're unleashing exponentially more energy. The kinetic force of billions of gallons of water moving at unprecedented speeds would reshape coastlines with each tide cycle. And here's the truly mind-bending part. This enhanced tidal system wouldn't just affect water. The gravitational forces strong enough to create such massive tides would also stress Earth's crust, potentially triggering earthquakes and volcanic activity on a scale we've never witnessed. But what if we turn the dial up tenfold? What would happen when Earth's gentle oceanic breathing becomes a planetary roar that nothing could silence? In this amplified world, the very concept of a coastline becomes meaningless. What we know as beaches, harbors, and coastal cities would exist in a constant state of submersion and exposure, like breathing lungs made of sand and stone. Imagine standing where Manhattan's financial district sits today. In our hypothetical world, twice daily, a wall of water 60 feet high would surge up the Hudson River, swallowing Wall Street, engulfing the 9/11 Memorial, and turning the subway system into a vast underwater cavern. Hours later, as the tide retreated, it would leave behind a landscape scraped raw, buildings caked in salt and seaweed, cars tumbled like toys in a bathtub. Miami would cease to exist as we know it. The Art Deco hotels of South Beach would stand like islands at high tide, their foundations constantly battered by waters that could reach the 15th floor. The Everglades wouldn't be a wetland ecosystem, it would become a tidal sea that advances and retreats across hundreds of miles of what is now dry land. San Francisco Bay would transform into something resembling an inland sea that doubles and halves in size every 12 hours. The Golden Gate Bridge, engineered to withstand earthquakes and winds, would face a new challenge: massive tidal flows that could exert forces equivalent to multiple tsunamis daily. The famous hills of San Francisco would become temporary islands, connected to the mainland only during the brief periods of lowest tide. But the changes wouldn't stop at dramatic coastal cities. Rivers would become tidal highways extending far inland. The Mississippi River, currently tidal for about 100 miles from its mouth, would experience tidal influence all the way to St. Louis, over 500 miles inland. Imagine the shock of residents in Memphis watching their riverfront suddenly surge with seawater, then recede. Twice each day, the English Channel would periodically drain to reveal an underwater landscape of shipwrecks and lost cities, only to refill hours later with enough force to make the channel impassable to any vessel. The Mediterranean Sea would slosh back and forth like water in a bathtub, alternately draining from places like Venice and then returning with devastating power. Perhaps most terrifyingly, these aren't gentle, predictable changes. The sheer volume of water moving at such speeds would create turbulence patterns unlike anything in nature. Whirlpools the size of entire bays would form where massive tidal flows meet resistance. The sound alone, billions of gallons of water rushing across continents twice daily, would create a constant oceanic thunder that would never cease. Coastal agriculture would become impossible. The salt spray alone from these megatides would sterilize soil for miles inland. Airports built near water would need to be elevated to heights that would make them look more like oil rigs than transportation hubs. Bridges would require engineering solutions that don't currently exist, designed to withstand hydraulic forces that could move mountains. The ocean wouldn't just rise, it would attack with the force of liquid avalanches, carving new coastlines with each cycle, creating and destroying islands, and turning our familiar blue marble into a world where the sea doesn't just touch the land, it devours it. But this is only the beginning of the chaos. The question becomes, how would 8 billion human beings adapt to a world where the coastlines themselves are weapons of mass destruction? In this transformed world, the story of human civilization would need to be completely rewritten. 3 billion people currently live within 100 miles of a coast. In our hypothetical reality, every single one of them would become climate refugees overnight. Picture the mass exodus, entire populations abandoning cities that took centuries to build, carrying what they can as they flee inland ahead of tides that could arrive like clockwork tsunamis. New York's 8 million residents wouldn't just need to evacuate, they would need to relocate permanently to places that never existed before, creating refugee camps that would dwarf anything in human history. But humanity is remarkably adaptable. As coastal cities drowned, New forms of architecture would emerge from necessity. We might see the rise of floating megacities, massive platforms anchored in deeper waters, designed to rise and fall with the tides like gigantic boats that never leave port. These floating metropolises would need to be self-sufficient, generating their own power, growing their own food, and managing their own water supplies while riding the massive tidal swells. Venice, ironically, might become the template for survival. Its historical experience with flooding and canal systems could provide the blueprint for a new kind of urban design. But instead of charming gondolas navigating narrow waterways, we'd see massive ships serving as public transportation, ferrying people between floating districts that rise and fall 60 feet twice daily. Agriculture would undergo a complete revolution. Traditional farming near any coastline would become impossible, forcing humanity to develop new methods of food production. Imagine vast hydroponic farms built on stilts hundreds of feet high, or underground agricultural complexes carved deep enough into bedrock to remain stable despite the crushing forces above. The global economy would reorganize around entirely new principles. International shipping, currently dependent on predictable harbors and stable port facilities, would need to adapt to loading and unloading cargo while platforms rise and fall with extreme tides. We might see the development of flexible port systems, mechanical structures that could extend and contract like telescopes, maintaining connections between ships and shore despite dramatic elevation changes. Some communities might choose to embrace the rhythm entirely, creating societies that work during low tide and retreat to safety during high tide. These tidal cultures would develop new social structures, work schedules, and even sleep patterns based on the oceanic pulse that dominates their world. The psychological impact would be profound. Imagine never again experiencing the simple pleasure of a sunset walk on a stable beach. Children would grow up in a world where the horizon constantly changes, where the landscape transforms twice daily, and where the ocean is not a place of recreation but a force of nature to be respected and feared. Emergency response systems would need to be reimagined from the ground up. Current disaster preparedness assumes emergencies are temporary disruptions to normal life. But in this world, the emergency would be permanent, requiring constant vigilance and preparation for the next tidal surge. Yet even as humanity struggles to adapt to these oceanic giants, we would discover that our survival depends not just on engineering and evacuation plans. The natural world that supports all life on Earth would be fighting its own battle for existence. Facing changes so dramatic they could unravel the ecological foundations that have supported life for millions of years. The question becomes, in a world where humans must constantly flee the advancing sea, what happens to the countless other species that call the ocean's edge their home? In our amplified tidal world, nature's most delicate and vital ecosystems would face an apocalyptic transformation. The intertidal zones, those magical spaces where land meets sea, have evolved over millions of years to thrive in the gentle rhythm of normal tides. But increase that rhythm tenfold, and you don't just change the habitat, you obliterate it entirely. Consider the ancient mangrove forests that currently protect tropical coastlines. These remarkable trees have adapted to survive in saltwater, their intricate root systems designed to filter nutrients from gentle tidal flows while providing nurseries for countless marine species. But mangroves evolved for tides that rise and fall a few feet, not 60 feet. The crushing force of hyper-amplified tides would rip these forests from their foundations twice daily, leaving behind devastated mudflats where some of Earth's most biodiverse ecosystems once thrived. The coral reefs, already struggling with warming oceans and acidification, would face a new existential threat. Corals need stable water conditions and consistent light levels to survive. In our hypothetical world, the massive tidal movements would create underwater sandstorms, burying reefs in sediment during high tide, then exposing them to deadly air during extreme low tides. The Great Barrier Reef, the Coral Triangle, the Caribbean reefs, all would become graveyards of bleached limestone, their vibrant ecosystems reduced to rubble in a matter of months. But the destruction wouldn't stop at the waterline. Migratory shorebirds that have navigated by tidal patterns for millions of years would lose their ancient road maps. Sandpipers that time their intercontinental flights to arrive precisely when tidal mudflats expose the richest feeding grounds would find those mudflats either permanently submerged or scoured clean by tidal forces too powerful to support the tiny organisms they depend on. The ripple effects would cascade through marine food webs with devastating efficiency. Fish species that spawn in shallow coastal waters would find their breeding grounds transformed into violent washing machines, their eggs and larvae unable to survive the turbulence. Salmon runs that depend on precise tidal timing to enter rivers would face torrents so powerful they would be swept back out to sea or crushed against canyon walls. Marine mammals would struggle to adapt to a world where their acoustic navigation systems become useless. Whales communicate across vast oceanic distances using low-frequency calls, but the constant thunder of megatides would create a wall of noise that could make their songs inaudible. Dolphins that hunt in shallow bays would find their territories alternately flooded beyond recognition and then exposed as lifeless mudflats. The ocean's microscopic foundation, the phytoplankton that produces over half the oxygen we breathe, would face catastrophic disruption. These tiny organisms thrive in the stable, sunlit waters near the surface, but extreme tidal mixing would constantly churn deep, nutrient-poor waters to the surface while dragging oxygen-producing organisms into the dark depths where they cannot photosynthesize. Kelp forests, the rainforests of the sea, would be systematically destroyed. These towering underwater cathedrals require stable anchorage points on the seafloor and predictable water movement to maintain their complex, three-dimensional structures. The hydraulic violence of amplified tides would snap kelp like matchsticks, eliminating the habitat that supports thousands of species from sea otters to rockfish. Perhaps most tragically, many species wouldn't have time to adapt. Evolution works on timescales of thousands to millions of years, but ecological collapse can happen in decades or even years. The intricate relationships between predator and prey, pollinator and plant, parent and offspring, all calibrated over eons to work within the gentle rhythm of normal tides, would shatter like glass in a hurricane. Yet the destruction wouldn't be limited to the oceans themselves. The massive tidal forces reshaping coastlines twice daily would have profound effects that reach deep into the Earth's interior, potentially awakening geological forces that have slept for millennia. And still, the tides would have more to take than just the life that depends on the sea's edge. As we zoom out from the biological catastrophe unfolding in our hypothetical world, we discover that 10 times stronger tides would stress our planet in ways that reach far beyond moving water. Earth itself would begin to crack under the pressure. The connection between tides and earthquakes isn't science fiction, it's measurable reality. Even today's gentle tides create enough stress on Earth's crust to influence seismic activity. Scientists have documented how some fault lines are more likely to slip during spring tides when gravitational forces are strongest. Now imagine that stress multiplied by 10, applied twice daily, forever. The San Andreas Fault, already under tremendous tectonic pressure, would experience regular tidal stressing equivalent to major earthquake forces. Instead of storing stress over decades or centuries before releasing it in catastrophic quakes, fault lines might slip continuously, creating a world of constant seismic activity. Buildings would need to be designed not just for the big one, but for the twice-daily tremor that never stops. But the effects would penetrate even deeper. The immense tidal forces would flex Earth's entire crust like a stress ball being squeezed and released. This constant deformation would generate heat through friction, potentially affecting the planet's internal temperature balance. Regions with thinner crust, like mid-ocean ridges and rift valleys, might experience increased volcanic activity as the repeated stress helps magma find new pathways to the surface. Consider how this would transform places like Iceland or Hawaii. Volcanic islands that currently experience occasional eruptions might find themselves in states of semi-permanent volcanic activity. The Ring of Fire around the Pacific would earn its name in ways its creators never imagined, as tidal stresses repeatedly squeeze magma chambers and fault systems that span thousands of miles. Perhaps most fundamentally, these extreme tides would alter Earth's rotation through increased tidal friction. Currently, Tidal forces are gradually slowing Earth's rotation by about 1.7 milliseconds per century, barely perceptible. But 10 times stronger tides would create friction forces that could slow our planet's spin much more dramatically. Picture the implications. If days gradually became longer, our carefully calibrated ecosystems would need to adapt to changing cycles of light and darkness. Plants that evolved to photosynthesize during 24-hour day cycles would need to adjust to 25, 26, or even 30-hour days. Animal circadian rhythms, honed over millions of years, would be thrown into chaos. The changing rotation rate would also affect Earth's magnetic field, which depends partly on the motion of molten iron in the planet's core. A significantly slower rotation could weaken our magnetic shield against cosmic radiation, potentially stripping away more of our atmosphere and making the surface less hospitable to life. Weather patterns would undergo dramatic shifts as well. Earth's rotation drives the Coriolis effect, which shapes everything from hurricane formation to global wind patterns. Slower rotation would mean weaker Coriolis forces, potentially creating entirely new climate zones and weather systems unlike anything in human experience. The massive twice-daily movement of ocean water would also redistribute heat around the planet in unprecedented ways. Currently, ocean currents like the Gulf Stream help regulate global climate by moving warm water toward the poles and cold water toward the equator. But extreme tidal mixing would overwhelm these currents, potentially creating a world where tropical heat spreads much further north and south, while polar cold penetrates deeper toward the equator. Even our satellite systems would be affected. The changing gravitational environment and altered magnetic field would require constant recalibration of GPS and communication satellites. Navigation systems that currently rely on precise timing and stable orbital mechanics would need complete redesign to function in a world where the fundamental forces are constantly shifting. But perhaps the most unsettling realization is that these planetary changes would all be driven by forces originating not from Earth itself, but from our relationship with the Moon. In this transformed world, we would discover that our celestial neighbor isn't just a passive light in the night sky. It's the conductor of a cosmic symphony that could reshape our entire world. And that raises the ultimate question. In a universe where such forces can be unleashed, how stable is the delicate dance that keeps our Moon in its current orbit and Earth in its current state? In our quest to understand the implications of 10 times stronger tides, we must turn our gaze upward to the silent architect of this oceanic chaos, our Moon. This celestial companion, hanging serenely in space, would become both the source of Earth's transformation and potentially its ultimate victim. The relationship between Earth and Moon is more delicate than most people realize. It's not just that the Moon creates tides. The tides also affect the Moon. Every time water bulges toward our lunar companion, it creates a gravitational feedback that very gradually pulls the Moon away from Earth. Currently, this happens at a rate of about 1.5 inches per year, so slowly that human civilization will never notice it, but amplify tidal forces by 10. And this cosmic dance becomes a frantic waltz racing towards separation. The dramatically increased tidal bulges would create much stronger gravitational feedback, potentially accelerating the Moon's recession by orders of magnitude. Instead of drifting away over billions of years, our Moon might begin its departure on timescales that human generations could witness. Imagine the psychological impact of living in a world where the Moon visibly shrinks in the night sky over the course of decades. Children would grow up knowing that the Moon their grandparents remembered was noticeably larger, closer, more influential. The full moons that inspired poets and lovers throughout human history would gradually diminish, creating a generation that experiences a fundamentally different relationship with the night sky. But a receding Moon would create a feedback loop of catastrophic proportions. As the Moon moves farther away, its gravitational influence would weaken, but this wouldn't necessarily make tides gentler. It might make them more chaotic. Earth would begin to wobble more dramatically on its axis, like a spinning top losing its stability. This wobbling, called axial precession, would destabilize our seasons in ways that could make climate change seem predictable by comparison. Regions that currently experience moderate seasonal variation might swing between tropical heat and Arctic cold within the same year. The polar ice caps might alternately face the sun directly or angle away into permanent winter, creating ice ages and heat waves that could last for decades rather than millennia. The moon's gravitational influence also helps stabilize Earth's axial tilt at about 23.5 degrees, the angle that gives us our current seasonal patterns. Without the moon's steady influence, Earth's tilt could vary wildly, potentially swinging from nearly 0 degrees, no seasons at all, to 85 degrees. Extreme seasons where each pole experiences 6 months of continuous daylight followed by 6 months of darkness. Mars offers a terrifying preview of this possibility. Without a large moon to stabilize it, Mars's axial tilt varies chaotically over periods of millions of years, contributing to the planet's current state as a frozen desert. Earth, losing its lunar anchor, might begin a similar journey toward climatic chaos. But there's another possibility, one even more dramatic. If tidal forces became extreme enough, they might not just push the moon away. They might actually stress the Earth-Moon system beyond its breaking point. The moon itself, subjected to 10 times the normal tidal stresses from Earth, might begin to deform. Currently, the moon is tidally locked to Earth, always showing us the same face because tidal forces have synchronized its rotation with its orbit. But extreme reverse tidal forces from an Earth with amplified oceans might begin to tear at the moon's structure, potentially causing moonquakes. Volcanic activity on a body that has been geologically dead for billions of years, or in the most extreme scenario, actual fragmentation. A fragmenting moon would rain debris on Earth in meteor showers that could last for centuries, while simultaneously removing the gravitational anchor that keeps our planet's climate stable. The night sky would transform from a comforting canopy of stars and a single moon into a chaotic display of rocky fragments reflecting sunlight in unpredictable patterns. Yet, even in this cosmic catastrophe, humanity might find ways to adapt and survive. The question becomes, what would those survival strategies look like? And could they preserve not just human life, but human civilization? Standing at the crossroads of catastrophe and adaptation, humanity in this tidal-dominated world would face two starkly different paths into the future. The choice between them would determine not just our survival, but what it means to be human on a planet where the sea rules supreme. In this timeline, humanity doesn't just survive the oceanic transformation, we evolve with it. Floating megacities become the crown jewels of human engineering, massive platforms that ride the tidal swells like artificial islands. These aren't simple boats, but complete ecosystems, vertical farms that stretch toward the sky, fusion power plants that generate energy from the hydrogen in seawater, and residential districts that expand and contract like living organisms as the population flows with economic tides. The city of New Atlantis, built where New York once stood, rises and falls 60 feet twice daily, its flexible architecture breathing with the ocean's pulse. Magnetic levitation systems keep essential services stable within buildings that sway like kelp forests, while pneumatic tubes transport people and goods between platforms that may be separated by miles of churning water during high tide. Humanity develops an entirely new relationship with energy. The massive tidal forces that destroyed the old world become the power source for the new one. Tidal generators the size of skyscrapers capture the kinetic energy of billions of gallons of moving water, producing more clean energy than humanity ever dreamed possible. The climate crisis becomes a historical footnote as fossil fuels are abandoned in favor of the inexhaustible power of the tides. Maritime agriculture revolutionizes food production. Kelp farms stretch for hundreds of miles, engineered to withstand the violent tidal forces while producing protein-rich harvests. Floating greenhouses use desalinated seawater and artificial lighting to grow traditional crops, while new forms of aquaculture create protein sources that never existed in the gentle seas of the past. Children in this world grow up as natural sailors, learning to read tidal patterns the way their ancestors read weather. They develop an intuitive understanding of ocean mechanics that makes them as comfortable in the water as on land. Schools are built on floating platforms that travel with the tides, exposing students to different oceanic environments as part of their basic education. The global economy reorganizes around tidal timing. Business meetings are scheduled around tide tables, with important negotiations happening during the calm periods between tidal rushes. A new form of temporal currency develops, where timing becomes as valuable as traditional money. Knowing exactly when and where to be as tides create temporary opportunities becomes a crucial skill. But there's a darker timeline, where humanity simply cannot adapt fast enough to the oceanic violence. In this world, the mass exodus from coastal areas creates refugee crises that overwhelm inland regions. Billions of climate migrants converge on areas never designed to support such populations, creating resource conflicts that tear apart the social fabric of civilization. The global economy collapses as international trade becomes impossible. Ships that once connected continents are destroyed by tidal forces too powerful for any vessel to navigate. Island nations simply vanish beneath the waves, their entire cultures lost to the violence of the amplified tides. The interconnected world of global commerce fragments into isolated inland communities that struggle to maintain even basic technology without international supply chains. Food production fails catastrophically. The loss of coastal agricultural areas, combined with the destruction of marine ecosystems, creates famines that dwarf anything in human history. Inland regions, suddenly required to feed populations 5 or 10 times their normal size, exhaust their soil and water resources within years. Desertification spreads as desperate communities clear forests and overgraze grasslands in futile attempts to feed the masses. Technology regresses as the industrial infrastructure that supports modern civilization is repeatedly destroyed by tidal forces. The rare earth minerals needed for electronics, the precision manufacturing facilities that produce everything from medical devices to solar panels, the research institutions that drive scientific progress, all are lost to the advancing seas. In this timeline, humanity retreats not just geographically but intellectually. The vast body of human knowledge stored in coastal universities and research centers is lost. Libraries flood, data centers are destroyed, and the accumulated wisdom of centuries disappears beneath the waves. Surviving communities focus entirely on immediate survival, abandoning the long-term thinking that built modern civilization. The psychological trauma creates a generation that fears the ocean rather than respects it. Children grow up knowing that the sea is humanity's enemy, a force that stole their heritage and condemned them to lives of struggle. The beaches that once symbolized vacation and relaxation become forbidden zones, patrolled by emergency responders waiting for the next tidal surge. Looking at humanity's track record with environmental challenges, the most likely scenario might combine elements of both futures. Some regions and communities would successfully adapt, creating pockets of innovative tidal civilization, while others would collapse into chaos and regression. The result could be a world more divided than ever between the maritime elite who mastered the new oceanic reality and the inland refugees still struggling to survive it. The critical factor might be time. If tidal amplification happened gradually over decades, humanity might successfully choose the path of adaptation. But if the change occurred rapidly, the path of collapse might be unavoidable, regardless of human ingenuity and determination. Yet as we contemplate these alternate futures, we're reminded that they remain firmly in the realm of speculation. The tides that currently caress our shores with such gentle regularity are not our enemies, but our partners in the delicate balance that makes Earth habitable. Perhaps the most important lesson from this thought experiment isn't about surviving amplified tides, but about appreciating the remarkable stability of the tidal system we actually possess. As our journey through this oceanic thought experiment draws to a close, we find ourselves back where we started, standing on a beach at sunset, watching the gentle rhythm of normal tides. But now these familiar waves carry new meaning. They're no longer just moving water. They're evidence of a cosmic balance so precise and delicate that even imagining its disruption reveals the miracle of our current reality. The tides we've lived with throughout human history represent one of the most stable forces on our planet. While earthquakes surprise us, volcanoes rage unpredictably, and weather systems shift chaotically, the tides maintain their ancient rhythm with clockwork precision. Twice daily, for billions of years, They have risen and fallen within ranges that allow life to flourish at the boundary between sea and land. This consistency has shaped everything we are. The tidal pools where early life forms first experimented with existence beyond the sea. The coastal wetlands that filter our water and protect us from storms. The predictable harbors that enabled human exploration and trade. The beaches where we find peace and perspective. All of these gifts exist because our tides are exactly as strong as they are, no stronger, no weaker. In our imagined world of amplified tides, we discovered that the ocean's pulse is connected to everything. The stability of our coastlines, the survival of countless species, the rotation of our planet, even the orbit of our moon. Increased tidal forces. And you don't just make bigger waves. You trigger a cascade of changes that could transform Earth into an alien world. But our current reality offers a different lesson entirely. The same gravitational forces that could theoretically destroy our world are, in their current gentle manifestation, among the forces that sustain it. Tidal mixing brings nutrients from the deep ocean to surface waters, supporting the marine food webs that feed billions of people. Tidal friction helps stabilize Earth's rotation and climate. Tidal rhythms provide the predictable cycles that countless species depend on for reproduction, migration, and survival. Even the gradual slowing of Earth's rotation caused by tidal friction serves a purpose. As days slowly lengthen over millions of years, they provide a mechanism for life to adapt gradually to cosmic changes rather than being shocked by sudden shifts. The Moon's equally gradual recession ensures that its stabilizing influence on Earth's climate fades slowly enough for life to evolve new balancing mechanisms. Perhaps most remarkably, the current strength of our tides appears to be optimal for the existence of complex life. Too weak, and the ocean would stagnate, lacking the mixing needed to distribute nutrients and oxygen. Too strong, as we've seen in our thought experiment, and the violence would destroy the very ecosystems that make Earth habitable. The tide pools that fascinate children and scientists alike exist only because tidal ranges are moderate enough to create stable zones that are alternately wet and dry, but gentle enough for life to adapt to the transition. These natural laboratories, where marine creatures learned to survive brief periods out of water, may have been the stepping stones that allowed life to colonize the land billions of years ago. As you drift towards sleep tonight, consider the astronomical precision required to create the world we inhabit. Our moon sits at exactly the right distance to create tides that nurture rather than destroy. Earth rotates at exactly the right speed to make those tides predictable. Our planet's size and composition create exactly the right oceanic response to lunar gravitational pull. The gentle waves lapping against shores around the world tonight are not just water in motion. They are the physical expression of cosmic forces so perfectly balanced that they have allowed intelligence to evolve and contemplate its own existence. The tide is not just Earth breathing in rhythm with the moon. It is the universe maintaining the conditions necessary for consciousness to emerge and wonder at the stars. In a cosmos where forces powerful enough to obliterate worlds are commonplace, we live on a planet where those same forces have been gentle enough to nurture life for billions of years. The tides that could theoretically destroy everything we know are, in their current form, among the forces that make everything we know possible tonight. As the tide turns in its ancient rhythm, carrying away the day's concerns and preparing the shores for tomorrow's possibilities, we can rest in the knowledge that this cosmic dance will continue long after our own brief moment in time has passed. The tide that could change everything remains, for now, the tide that sustains everything. And in that rhythm, rise, fall, we find not just the pulse of the ocean, but the heartbeat of a universe where chaos and order, destruction and creation maintain the delicate balance we call home. The tide turns. The moon pulls, the earth responds, and in that eternal conversation between celestial bodies, life continues its remarkable experiment in consciousness on the shores of possibility.